Olá, eu sou Adriana Sabino, a presidente do Centro Cultural Brasil USA da Flórida, o CCBU, e a curadora do primeiro festival literário de Miami, o Flea Miami. Eu dou as boas-vindas a todos vocês que estão nos assistindo, espero que estejam gostando e nos acompanhem o resto do dia. E também amanhã, quando nós vamos ter um programa infanto-juvenil. Eu quero dar as boas-vindas especialmente para nossos convidados nesse painel. Nós temos hoje 3 pessoas muito importantes, o escritor, o escritor João Almino, a tradutora Elizabeth Lowe e o professor Ricardo Vasconcelos, que vai fazer a mediação desse painel. O painel será em inglês. Eles vão falar sobre o último romance de João Almino, Entre Facas Algodão, traduzido para o inglês como The Last Twist of the Knife. João Almino é um escritor brasileiro, é um escritor premiado, é autor de 7 romances, dos quais os seguintes foram traduzidos para o inglês: The 5 Seasons of Love, The Book of Emotions, Free City, Enigmas of Spring and The Last Twist of the Knife, a ser lançado pela Dalkey Archive Press. João Almino também é diplomata, foi cônsul-geral do Brasil em Miami e presidente honorário do CCBU, e um dos inspiradores desse festival. Muito obrigada pela participação de vocês. Elizabeth Lowe é tradutora de português brasileiro e lusófono e espanhol. A Academia Brasileira de Letras reconheceu sua tradução de Os Sertões, de Euclides da Cunha, em 2010. Ela ensina no curso de mestrado na NYU, fundou o Centro de Estudos de Tradução na Universidade de Illinois e é membro do Comitê de Tradução PEN. Elizabeth recebeu o Prêmio de Tradução Literária do National Endowment for the Arts, Dotação Literária para as Artes. E Ricardo Vasconcelos, o nosso mediador de hoje, é professor catedrático de literatura portuguesa e brasileira na Universidade Estadual de San Diego, na Califórnia, onde dirige o programa de português. As suas áreas de investigação sobre literatura moderna e contemporânea incluem as relações entre os modernismos português e brasileiro e as vanguardas europeias, bem como a relação da produção literária contemporânea com a identidade nacional. O painel vai ser em inglês, porque nós estamos falando da tradução do mais recente romance de João Almino, e eu deixo vocês aqui com esses excelentes participantes. Bom painel para vocês.
Muito obrigado.
Obrigado, Adriana. Oi, bom dia a todos. Good morning to everyone. Good afternoon for those of you in Miami, of course. I'm talking from California, so it does feel like morning. And I wanted to say thank you to João, Elizabeth, and Adriana for inviting me to participate in this event that is here, to highlight their work, both João Almino's work as a writer and Elizabeth Lowe's as a translator. And also I want to congratulate Adriana for the remarkable feat of pulling together this festival, which looks really and is already going very, very well. So thank you for having me also, and congratulations. I hope this is the first of many festivals that will be coming next. So I wanted to start by talking a little bit about the book. João Almino, Adriana has already introduced João and Elizabeth Lowe. I can add a few things with regard to João Almino's very oeuvre, or his works. He's the author of the Brasilia Quintet. I would at this point flash all the books from João Almino, but they are locked up in my university due to the pandemic, and I have no access to them. I was fortunate enough to still have this one with me, but he's a leading author in terms of representing Brasilia in particular, a different kind of a Brasilia, not a Brasilia that is the political one, but one that is all of those dreams of a utopian society, the disappointments, the fulfillments as well. And are represented in the likes of that generation of the first dwellers of the city of Brasilia. I have great pleasure in reading books, the Book of Emotions, Cidade Livre, ideas on where to spend the end of the world, Samba Enredo, and the 5 Seasons of Love, right? And that quintet is now actually a 6-volume group, really, no longer just 5. Although it's branching out of Brasilia more, also into the relations with Spain, and relations also in this book, for example, with the northeast of Brazil or the north of Brazil. I just can say that she's an author that has translator that is a spectacular curriculum also in terms of the authors that she has translated. And those include, of course, Clarice Lispector, Euclides da Cunha, Machado de Assis, António Lobo Antunes, Teolinda Gerção, recently João de Melo. She's also a scholar on translation, and that should be noted as well. Not only is she the author of a book about the representation of the city in Brazilian literature, but also the author of a book on the translation and the rise of Inter-American language. Literature, the translation and the rise of Inter-American literature. Her translation of the happiest ending for love story is an accident was a finalist for the Impact Award, and the Brazilian Academy of Letters recognized her for classic. Da Cunha. João Almino himself is also a member of the Brazilian Academy of Letters. So as you can see, I really sit here with tremendous accomplished writer, translator, scholars, and it is really a great honor to be moderating this table. I will start briefly with some aspects of the novel that we are presenting here today. We're presenting the translation, and then we'll open up to an open conversation with João and Elizabeth, and we'll be reading some passages also of the novel in Portuguese and in translation. Okay, I actually gave a title, and it is a very short. I gave a title to this text because when I read this book, Entre Facas e Algodão, or The Last Twist of the Knife, I do ask myself the following question: Will the Brazilian Casa Grande give up a seat at the big table? The Last Twist of the Knife, published originally in 2017, and now going to be published by Dalkey Press into 2021 with Elizabeth Trenton, tells the story of a nameless septuagenarian who lives behind the comfort of his house, who leaves behind the comfort of his house in Brasilia. He has earned his life as a lawyer in the Brazilian capital, but will go back in search of lost time to the farm of Riacho Negro, next to a fictive Várzea Pacífica. It is not Pacific at all, an imaginary but very plausible town in the north of Brazil. As he separates from his wife in Taguatinga, he attempts to reconnect to a childhood love and avenge a crime that marked his life forever. He will seek to regain the past, to buy back the house in which he was the servant's son, and in the process he will go as far as planting cotton in the property again. Moreover, he will try to make a claim to a number of things that he believes he has been entitled to, but which he never received, starting with his unrequited love of childhood and adolescence, but also including an actual inheritance. His attempt is inevitably doomed to fail. This much is expected. But we should ask ourselves, why specifically are such dreams foolish? Is it only because they are the past, they are about to pass, which of course you can never retrieve? Or is the present of Brazil what makes such dreams be foolish? At an allegorical level, I believe The Last Twist of the Knife is the perfect tale of contemporary Brazil. The suggestion that the protagonist is a Brazilian everyman, yes, no name really, should make us recognize something important, and that is that the novel displays the painful and very sharp notion held by a very large segment of the poorest among the Brazilian population, that they were never allowed to sit at the big table of the Casa Grande, but rather continue to be expected to serve it. Our anonymous protagonist was the son to a nondescript female servant of a Casa Grande, and grew up in that same hybrid context, a very peripheral attaché to the Casa Grande's main family, a godson to the powerful landowner. He occupies that social space in which many Brazilian domestic workers and descendants continue to dwell. They are figures that may never be exclusively workers of the families that own those Casa Grandes or the large apartments, but certainly they are not and will never be true members of the family. Coming back Brasilia, to which he had moved seeking to bridge his social gap, and going back in time and space to the north of the country, our protagonist tries to fulfill a lost love, to reconnect with a family that never really saw him as a member, but of which he might actually have been part. And he also tries to connect the land he was never supposed to inherit. We all know that on the receiving end of these journeys in search of lost time, we can never find what we hope to. But what the last twist of the knife asks is much richer than that. The book asks really if in contemporary Brazil, the most powerful, the ones that indeed continue to inherit both the Casa Grande and its sometimes large possessions, sometimes not so large, if they are willing to give up a seat at that big table. Will the godsons and stepsons be recognized as actual? Those former workers or their children, more often than not of darker skin complexion, benefit from any sort of reparation? In today's Brazil, will the descendants of the enslaved ones or the descendants of the indigenous populations be allowed to raise their heads? Or will they continue to be pushed down and told to know their place? The very last twist of the knife is certainly those Hamletian twists and arrows of outrageous fortune, those twists of fate that can leave us all speechless, hanging on to a question mark, or with an ellipsis at the tip of our tongue. But in this book, the last twist of the knife is moreover the fact that the protagonist's desire to have that past be honored in the present may be frustrated altogether. In the very last page of the book, the narrator and protagonist speaks of the son of the Casa Grande, with whom he played as a child, but who moved on to a better education with more opportunities. The narrator protagonist says, "We are brothers who were born unequal, one poor, another rich. We took different paths in life. The more time has passed, the more our differences have deepened. But even so, we perceive, at least this is what I think, that we are blood of the same blood, and we are capable of creating, not now, but who knows, one day, spaces for dialogue and reconciliation. History runs its course," end of quote. "History runs its course, and sometimes politics and politicians row against the stream, only to find themselves ashore, exhausted for trying to maintain the status quo against the winds of change. That this book is written and published at a time when Brazil was so profoundly divided in half is no coincidence. This was written, I imagine, around 2016, since it was published in 17. In the context of a Brazil, and I do think that João Almeida was sensing that same reality and presenting it in the book. In the context of a Brazil, and indeed a world that is highly polarized and that lives in a post-truth moment, the book presents the very context that the country faces and the very dilemma. To accept that the most disenfranchised will claim and should claim their share, and to hope also for reconciliation based on the fact that they are, as João's book and Elizabeth's words also say, blood from the same blood. So my notes should not lead you to believe, though, that the book is written with pain, grief, vindictiveness, though it has its share, of course. Indeed, it is written as a diary, as a protagonist's journal in which he reflects upon his hopes and blunders. The book boasts a great sense of humor and irony and narrative playfulness, and carries with itself the wonderful strategies of ambiguity that are reminiscent, for example, of Machado de Assis. And ambiguity is really a key word. From the outset, in this moment of post-truth, the plot of the last twist of the knife is driven by doubt. The protagonist seeks to elicit doubts about adultery, fatherhood, only to come to the conclusion that those same doubts will not be satisfied by any form of clarification. As in many of Machado's texts, I would say that this book directly echoes Machado in many ways. The ambience of doubt is built up by the voice of a narrator who always leaves the reader hesitant about how much this narrator can be trusted. On the other hand, João Almeina's novel considers the role that the new technologies and tools such as WhatsApp, Facebook, etc., currently assume in the individual and gregarious lives of young and old. And this was even before the pandemic. In the novel, these technologies serve the protagonist in his double attempt to rescue the past, assisting him both in the goal of materializing a relationship that was once impossible and in his planned revenge for a decades-old crime. In order to revisit these situations, connecting lost dots, reconstituting context that his history has forgotten, these virtual media instruments have become essential. And in the context of the novel, though, these technologies both help to create the illusion of a past that is at a click away, a past that holds to the subject a status in between trauma and nostalgia. So, in sum, it is our great fortune that the English-speaking audience will now have access to this book with the excellent translation by Elizabeth Lowe of the wonderful novel that João Almino brings to us again. So with that, I'm going to switch gears here, and I wanted to hear what you think. I have some questions for João. I don't know if you want to say something before, if you want to go in another different route, but I have a few questions for João. Maybe I can make one and you'll take it from there as well. Yeah. So I look up a text that you published called Como Escrevo a Ficção, How I Write My Fiction, right? And of course, you explained that your characters gain a voice and a trajectory that you didn't plan at first. So I wondered how much this was the case in this novel as well. Was that the case that this everyman, as I call him, I don't know if you agree with that, started evolving in a trajectory that was defined along the way, or that you had a very clear plan for him?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Ricardo Vasconcelos, Professor Ricardo Vasconcelos, for your presentation. I cannot think of a better presentation for this novel. You could really pinpoint several aspects that are essential, not only to the plot, but to the very meaning what I thought this novel should be. I would also like at this point to congratulate Adriana Sabino and the Centro Cultural Brasil USA of Florida for organizing this excellent event. And I thank Elizabeth Lowe for translating this novel. It's really an honor for me to have her as a translator. Well, I think it's a very, very good point to start discussing the novel, to ask about the main character and narrator of the novel. That's where I start. Usually I always start with the character. It's very important for me to conceive the character very well. It's really essential to have a narrator for which I would also seek the perfect language in each novel. Of my 7 novels, 5 have been written in the first person, but these first persons have been very different, one from the other. This character, I can say that it lives with me since the very beginning, when I started my first novel, and I thought I had to decide whether I should set the novel in the northeast of Brazil or elsewhere. I decided to set it in Brasilia because to Brasilia, I could even bring my characters from the Northeast. I did not bring this particular character to the Northeast until this novel, but I brought other ones from the Northeast, but not only from the Northeast, of course. These are really novels that are set in a crossroads of different Brazils. This novel, in particular, is set in places that I know very well from my childhood. Although the farm and the little town are really imagined places. But I have been to several places that are very similar to those. I can say I lived in the sertão of the Northeast for some time because during my childhood, before I started going to school, and I started a bit late, I would spend sometimes 6 months on a farm in the sertão. And even after I started going to school, in a small town, but in fact much larger than this one in the novel, Mossoró, the town I was born in. I would still go to this area of the Sertão for 3 or 4 months a year. So I have met many characters that are similar to those in the novel. I could bring to the main character some of what I lived myself, not literally, but some of what I lived. The places are really, I brought from my memory many of these places. In fact, there is a passage, a few chapters in the novel that take place in Fortaleza also, in a neighboring state of Ceará, where I also lived. So I brought together several of these memories. Of course, memory in this book is an important character itself, but it's a failed memory, and they're right to point out that you can not trust totally the narrator and not even his memory, which fails sometimes. But memory has been an important character in my whole work, and it has been viewed in different ways depending on the novel. For example, in The 5 Seasons of Love, it's kind of an anti-Proustian movement. The narrator tries to erase her past, of course, failing to do that because the gesture of erasing creates, in fact, another narrative of past, present, and future. And in another book, which is also translated into English, which is the Book of Emotions, it's a different process. It's a blind photographer trying to remember photographs that were very important, very emotional for him, but he can only work out of his memory. He cannot see the photographs nor the reader. So in this case, I tried to use another perspective. Memory itself, with the character trying to recover the past, but with these failures, as I said. And I did not want to create a novel which, in a very traditional way, the main character or the narrator would try to recover totally this past, try to go back to it and be successful at rediscovering his roots. On the contrary, what I tried to show is that as in this attempt of going back, in fact, one only goes forward. It's a journey full of surprises in which the attempt to understand one's identity is in fact a construction of new identities. So there is this idea of an open identity or identity that's being constructed through this journey that supposedly is a journey towards the past. I don't know if with this I answered
No,
the question.
it did answer the question, but I guess my previous question was a bit loaded when I was asking if you were if the character evolved in any ways that you didn't predict at first.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
No, but maybe I can finish that with another aspect that maybe you can tie together the answers. You can see in the novel a lot of references to things that were very, very present in 2015 and 16. You know, you had the Comissões da Verdade, you had all the movements, of course, they existed before, but all the life of the Movimento Sem Terra, the demonstrations in the street against the Dilma government. So you told me that this character has been in your mind for a long, long time. But how was that political change around the time that the book was being, I imagine, finished? How do you think you were affected by that in your writing? Or how do you think the plot was affected? Not you, but the plot was somehow influenced or affected by those events?
Well, answering the first question first, There are always new elements that really evolve when you try to really create the character. I could have the character since long ago, but of course, as I write, it's transformed. As the novels themselves, as the plan, the sketches that I have of the novels, I always try to depart from something that I already know. I try to think even of an ending, of a beginning, of an ending, but with total freedom to re-elaborate, to really recreate characters and plots throughout the whole process. And so this happens with the character. And it's good also that the character can somehow evolve in the process, that it is not exactly the same character from beginning to end. And as you may know, I think you do, you have read my novels, I have, in fact, characters that migrate from one novel to another. And doing that, I try to show them through different perspectives, sometimes even at a different time in their lives. So this would answer your first question. As to the second question, of course, the present always has an influence on what I write. I have, on the other hand, been very careful, and I don't know if I have really been successful at that, but I try to be very careful not to write from the perspective of the mere conjuncture, of the mere present indeed, because I think it's very important, the role of the journalist, it's very important the role of the historian, the role of the philosopher, and so on. But the fiction writer has a role for himself or herself. And in this role, it's really fundamental to have characters that can survive and emotions that are attached to them. Also to avoid some, say, caricature, some simplification. It's important to have also some complexity in what you portray for the present. So it's important to have some conflict, to have some contradiction, to have different views, to not have only a single opinion throughout the whole novel, but to have the reader take the opportunity to confront some of them. So in this novel, there are these elements that you mentioned of the present. At the same time, I hope it's a novel that can be read, say, in different moments, because the main elements are those that unfortunately are present in Brazil.
Right, exactly.
It's very past, in its present, and hopefully not forever, but are permanent traits of Brazil in its social drama, for example, in its relations and its even racial relations and so on, aspects that you have highlighted in your presentation. My previous novel to this was one that was closer to the events that were taking place in the present, and that could be captured, in fact, even on covers of magazines and newspapers.
It was about the Arab Spring, and then
Exactly that one, and even there were in that one there were also protests in Brazil and so on. But again, in that one, which was of my novels, the one that was closer to this perspective of portraying the present, I tried to have this distance of the fiction writer. So you can read it not exactly through the perspective of the newspaper.
No,
Uh,
and um,
yeah, no, but I understand perfectly what you said. And despite what I want to do, nowadays I see that a novel that I wrote in the 80s, a novel that I wrote in the 90s, a novel that I wrote in the passage of one century to another, a novel that I wrote in 2010, do reflect some of the moods of, of the present um, in Brazil and elsewhere.
well, your book certainly isn't a report on that reality of 2016, for example, but it connects to that at the same time it connects to many other periods of Brazilian life, as you said, perhaps hopefully not in the future, in the sense that it tackles a number of social structures and systems that are there present, at least in the way that I see it, of course, right? So we have 13 minutes, and I want you guys to have a chance of reading a passage, and I want to ask Elizabeth, you are of course a very acclaimed translator from the Portuguese. Your experience is enormous. We've mentioned that. So I would like to ask you what is unique, what is particularly unique to translating João Almino, and or perhaps to translating this specific novel. I know it is the first novel that you translated from João. You've translated other texts by him. So maybe this would be a good segue for you to comment on that aspect, and then I'll leave you guys to read a passage that I know you've chosen.
Well, first of all, it's very exciting to be on this panel. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to meet face to face, even in the virtual space, with João, with whom I worked so long on this book, and also to meet you, Ricardo. Thank you for the introductions. I appreciate those. And Ricardo, you did a beautiful job of summarizing the novel, and you did it with great insight, I must say. And you hit upon a few of the things that made this novel so interesting and challenging to translate. First of all, the duality of the character and the idea of ambiguity. So as a co-creator, a translator really has to become a co-creator of a book and recreate it in another language for another audience. And so one takes on the responsibility for character development. It has to be, you have to create a character as convincingly in the new language as the character was created by the original author. And that means dealing with some issues like narrative voice, which in this book are particularly intricate because the main character shifts between his monologue, which is kind of, his narration, his diary-like narration of his journey to find his past or to reconnect with his past. And then he recreates episodes of dialogue, both real and imaginary, with the people he re-encounters on this journey and his recollections of dialogues in the past. So the tone and register of the novel are constantly shifting back and forth. And it's shifting back and forth between the contemporary urban standards Brazilian speech in the cities by educated people, and the language of the Northeast, which is particularly beautiful, unique, and it has linguistic roots that go all the way back to the Middle Ages. There are lots of anachronisms. There are regional terms, place names, names of plants and animals, and the climate itself has a lot of terminology associated with it. So there is that language of the Northeast that has to somehow come out and sound. You have to make that language sing, or have to try to make the language sing in English. That perhaps is one of the most difficult things to do because of the regionalisms of the speech of Northeastern Brazil, the use of the tu form, for example. And so I relied a lot on my experience with translating Euclides da Cunha because I did a lot of research for that book. I also lived in the Northeast as a child for a time, and I had that memory, which is also a memory of the senses. It's not just a linguistic memory, but it's a memory of smell and touch.
So you two are going back in time.
Yeah, so I was going back in time too. It was a journey for me too, a nostalgic journey. So there was that element of recreating the character and the different speech forms in the novel, the ambience of Northeast Brazil. And then there is the journey of memory and time. And as João mentioned, the character's memory is unreliable. And in that, I compared him in my translator's note to Antonio Lobo Antunes. And what I said was, by creating a deliberately ambiguous text, João Almino, like his Portuguese counterpart, Antonio Lobo Antunes, puts narrative reliability in question by presenting a kind of lie by which the narrator seeks impossible salvation, or at least shelter from a potentially damning present. So that ambiguity also has to be worked with through language. And one of the areas that I found myself really focusing on was the use of multiple past tenses. Portuguese in general has a much richer use of verb tense, yes, than we do in English. And so trying to create the linguistic texture through this filter of memory was one of the things that I did have to focus on. All that being said, João was a wonderful reader. He was always there, very quick responses to my questions. He did a very thorough reading of the drafts of the translation until we finally arrived at what is now going to go into print. So at every step of the way, he was right there, and I really did appreciate that collaboration. It made the experience all the richer, and I think, the result can be trusted.
Well, I think that's the perfect segue to actually read a little bit, a couple of passages. I think technically we have 7 minutes, so I have to apologize if I think I took too much time in the beginning. But we have 7 minutes, so without delaying any further, maybe we could read a couple passages in Portuguese and in translation as well, and I'll mute my microphone.
Ricardo, since we have so little time, let me just say that really language is essential as the most important element in all this work. And for me, it's really very important that the book in English is of a translation by Elizabeth Lowe. So the reader will in fact read Elizabeth, not only me. I will then possibly read just a paragraph, because then I want Elizabeth to read the larger segment of the translation, since we are talking about the translation here. So I'll read a short paragraph. No inverno, a chuva cobria o campo verde, o chão ficava marcado com o barro das botas, as conversas e risos se prolongavam no alpendre da casa grande de meus padrinhos, os aboios se animavam no campo, as muriçocas me picavam na nossa casa de tijolo aparente e vermelho. Eu me enrolava na rede e envolvia o rosto com um lençol, deixando só o nariz de fora e ouvindo os pingos bater nas telhas. Já na seca, o sol impiedoso castigava a fazenda do Riacho Negro e me cegava a vista. A poeira açoitava os campos cinzentos de árvores despojadas.
Oi, Glória.
O açude.
Ela mandou no e-mail que eu passei para vocês.
Eu vi o e-mail.
As cacimbas sem água, as pessoas zonzas cozinhando irritação no calor, e o curral vazio, o gado tangido para o Piauí. Do you have time now to listen to Elizabeth?
I think we do. We have 5 minutes, so
Okay.
and I can see already the challenges for Elizabeth to translate.
So I'll just read the English translation of what João just read in Portuguese. In winter, rain covered the green land. Our boots trampled mud over the floor. Conversation and laughter lingered on the porch of the big house of my godparents. The songs of the cowboys rose up from the pastures. The mosquitoes bit me in our red brick house. I'd roll myself up in the hammock, cover myself with a sheet, leaving just my nose exposed, and listen to the raindrops on the roof. At the height of the drought, the merciless sun punished Black Creek Ranch and blinded me. The dust whipped the gray fields with its bare trees, dazed people stewing with irritation in the heat. The wells were dry, the reservoir and the barn were empty. The cattle had migrated to Piauí.
If we have like 2 minutes more or 3, I could read another paragraph or no?
3 minutes.
2 minutes. Elizabeth, one paragraph from May 21st.
Okay.
Papai não aparece por esses rasgões de luz que vejo nas cortinas embotadas do passado. Minto. Ele aparece, e muito, quando vejo assombrado o que não vi. A faca dilacerando sua barriga, o sangue escoando feito rio pelo chão, o cadáver encostado na porta de um beco de várzea pacífica, a cidadezinha perto da fazenda do Riacho Negro, onde morávamos. E então, talvez, quando vi com apenas 2 anos, não tenho certeza, as imagens estão fora de foco. Uma cova funda, um montículo de terra com flores e uma cruz. Ele é uma terrível história que me angustia sempre.
My father doesn't appear in these shafts of light that I see through the drawn curtains of the past. I lie. He appears a lot when I see astonished what I didn't see then. The knife tearing open his belly, the blood flowing like a river along the ground, the corpse propped against a door in an alley of Várzea Pacífica, the little town near the ranch at Black Creek where we lived. And then perhaps what I saw at the age of just 2, I'm not sure. The images are out of focus, a deep grave, a mound of dirt with flowers and a cross. He's in a terrible story that torments me always.
So I think this is a beautiful way to, slightly ominous and beautiful way to finish up the session. I really thank you again for inviting me to do this part, but I think most of all, I want to encourage the viewers to follow the links and either get the edition in Portuguese of the book, published by Editora Record, or both, or to get also the edition translated by Elizabeth, which will be available as of next year with Dalkey Press. And thank you very much, João and Elizabeth and Adriana. I imagine Adriana wants to wrap it up, right? Your microphone is off, though.
Thank you so much for this inspiring section. Dr. Vasconcelos, your introduction about the book, put us in the mood to understand better the story. João, knowing that you created a character that has been with you for so many years, it's amazing. And Elizabeth, it was so interesting to learn that the book was like a trip, travel back to your memories, because you also lived there in the Northeast. Fascinating, really. I really want to buy another one for my cart. It's fantastic. I think I will read in Portuguese and then I will read the translation again.
Good.
Thank you so much for participating and inspiring our audience.
Well, thank you all, and thank you to the viewers as well, to the whole audience.
Thanks to everyone.
And I would like to remind that those videos will be on the platform. So if you want to review them and view them again, it will be there.